The morning air felt damp when I opened the kitchen window. The hills were still covered with mist, and the smell of rain came through the curtains. I could hear the sound of my husband moving slowly in the living room, searching for his glasses as he did every day. It was an ordinary morning, but something inside me felt strange, as if the past was waiting just outside that fog. After breakfast, I sat at the table and looked at the letter again. It had arrived 2 days ago, a thick cream envelope with handwriting I knew too well. Aluna Weaver, it said on the back, neat and strong, the kind of handwriting that makes you sit up. She was coming back to Wales. She and her husband Peter were moving back from London, buying a small house near the coast. She said she missed real life and old friends. That last part made me laugh quietly. Old friends. After 30 years, what kind of friends were we now? I had known Aluna when we were all young, before she became famous. We were a group of friends, always drinking too much, talking too loudly, trying to sound clever. We thought we would never grow old, but we did. And when she left Wales for London, she took more than her suitcases. She took Peter, who had once been mine. Nobody said it out loud then, but everyone knew. When the letter came this week, I felt something open in me that I thought was closed forever. I put the letter back into the drawer and went to the small cafe in town. It was where most of us met now. We called ourselves the Old Gang, though none of us liked the word old. There was Gwen, who still wore too much lipstick, Era, who had lost her husband but never her sense of humor, and Myra, who said she was happy to be single, though she still looked around every time a man entered the cafe. And then there was me, Margaret, married to a kind but silent man who loved the garden more than people. When I told them that Aluna was coming back, the table went quiet. Gwen was the first to speak. "So, the star returns," she said, stirring her coffee. "I saw her on television last year. She looked thinner, but not younger." Era smiled. "Do you think she still remembers us?" she asked. Myra said, "She remembers everyone, darling, especially men." We all laughed, but I felt the small twist of pain in my chest. I tried to hide it behind my cup. None of them knew what had happened between me, Peter, and Aluna. It was so long ago and life had gone on. But time doesn't erase everything. Some memories stay, even when you pretend they don't. That evening, my husband Brian came home from his walk, wet from the rain. He talked about the garden, about the neighbor's new dog, about the news on the radio. I nodded and smiled, but my mind was far away. I wondered what Aluna looked like now, how her voice had changed. I remembered her laugh, the way she could make any room brighter and colder at the same time. I thought of Peter, the way he used to hold my hand in the dark, years before everything went wrong. The day Aluna and Peter left Wales, I had gone to the train station. I told myself I was there to say goodbye. But I didn't say much. Peter had looked at me with guilt in his eyes, and I had smiled, pretending to be fine. Aluna had hugged me, soft and sweet, and said she would write. She never did. After that day, I married Brian. I told myself it was love, and maybe it was, in a quiet, safe way. But sometimes I wondered what my life would have been if I had gone to London instead. 2 weeks later, the Weavers arrived. News travels fast in small towns, and by the time their car stopped outside the white cottage near the river, half the village already knew. Gwen saw them first. She called me that afternoon. "She's here, Margaret," she said. "And she's still beautiful. Thinner, yes, but she looks expensive." I laughed again, but it sounded strange even to me. I told her I wasn't curious, but that was a lie. The next morning, I went to the post office to buy stamps. That was my excuse. The post office was next to the cafe, and from there I could see the road that led to the river. And that was where I saw her. Aluna Weaver, standing by the water with a bright scarf around her neck. Her hair was silver now, short and soft around her face, but her back was straight, her walk confident. She turned as if she felt my eyes on her, and for a second our gaze met. My heart jumped. I smiled, unsure what to do. Then she smiled too, and walked toward me. "Margaret," she said, her voice the same but softer. "I was hoping to see you." I tried to answer, but my mouth felt dry. "You look, well," I said at last. She laughed lightly. "Older, you mean?" We both laughed, and for a moment it was almost like before. She told me she and Peter were still settling in, that he was retired now but restless. She said she wanted to reconnect with everyone, to feel part of the town again. I nodded politely, all the while trying not to stare at her face. The years had touched her gently, but they had not taken her power. She still had that light, that strange mix of charm and distance that made people look twice. When I got home, Brian was trimming the hedges. I told him who I'd seen. He said, "That poet woman? She'll get bored here again. People like that don't stay." He didn't mean it cruelly, but his words stayed with me. Maybe he was right. Or maybe he didn't understand what it was like to leave and then come back. In the days that followed, Aluna and Peter began to appear everywhere. They came to the cafe one morning, sat 2 tables away from us. Everyone tried not to look, but of course they did. Aluna greeted us warmly, as if no time had passed. Peter smiled politely, his hair thin and his face tired. When he looked at me, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, regret, or maybe both. I lowered my gaze quickly. After that day, Aluna invited us all to dinner at their house. "Just a small reunion," she said. I wanted to say no, but Gwen said yes before I could speak. "We'd love to," she answered brightly. And so it was decided. The night of the dinner, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. I put on a blue dress that I hadn't worn in years. Brian said I looked nice and went back to his newspaper. I looked at myself and thought, what am I doing? But I went anyway. The weaver's cottage was beautiful, warm lights glowing through the windows. Aluna greeted us with wine and kisses on both cheeks. The room was filled with laughter, and for a while it almost felt easy. We talked about the old days, about people who had left, people who had died, and about the strange way life moves forward whether you want it to or not. Peter was quiet most of the evening. Once, when Aluna went to the kitchen, he looked at me across the table. His eyes met mine, and time disappeared. I felt a rush of old emotion, quick and painful. Then I looked away. After dinner, Aluna played some music on the old record player. The songs were the same ones we had listened to when we were young. She smiled at me and said, "Do you remember this, Margaret? That night by the river?" I nodded, though my voice caught in my throat. Of course I remembered. That was the night before she left. The night when everything changed. When we said goodbye that evening, she hugged me tightly. "Let's not lose touch again," she said. I promised we wouldn't, though I wasn't sure I meant it. On the walk home, Brian talked about how nice the food was. I nodded, but my thoughts were far away. I could still feel Peter's eyes on me, and I could still hear Aluna's laugh echoing in my head. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how strange it felt to see them again. The past had seemed so far away for so long, but now it was here, alive and breathing. I thought about the woman I had been then, full of hope and foolish dreams. And I wondered what Aluna had come back for. Friendship, perhaps. Or something more complicated. I didn't know yet, but I could feel it. Something had started again. Before I continue with the story, please like, subscribe, share, and let me know in the comments where you are listening from. Your support means a lot. Now, let's continue. The next morning, the rain had stopped. I walked into town early, the sky soft and gray above the hills. The streets were quiet except for the sound of the milk van. Everything looked the same, but I didn't feel the same anymore. Seeing Aluna and Peter again had opened something inside me that I thought was gone. I couldn't explain it, even to myself. At the cafe, Gwen and Era were already there, talking about the dinner. Gwen said, "Aluna hasn't changed much, has she? Still the center of attention?" Era smiled. "She looked happy, though. I liked her more than I expected." I sat down and ordered coffee. Myra arrived a few minutes later, holding a newspaper. "They've written about her in the local paper," she said. "There's a photo, too. Famous poet returns home. She looks lovely, doesn't she?" We all leaned closer to look. Aluna was standing in front of her new house, smiling. Peter stood behind her, half hidden in shadow. Something about that picture made my chest tighten. Maybe it was how familiar it looked. Aluna in front, Peter behind, waiting. It was like the old days. I said nothing. I didn't want them to notice my thoughts. After coffee, I walked home alone. The path by the river was wet and full of fallen leaves. The air smelled of rain and salt from the sea. I passed Aluna's house without meaning to. She was outside, cutting flowers from the garden. When she saw me, she waved and called my name. I tried to walk on, but she was already walking toward me with her usual bright smile. "Margaret, you look lost in thought," she said. "Come in for tea." "I insist." Before I could answer, she was already leading me toward the house. Inside, everything was beautiful but simple. Old wooden furniture, books everywhere, and the soft smell of flowers. It felt warm, alive, like her. Peter was sitting by the window with a book. When he saw me, he stood up and smiled politely. His eyes met mine for a moment, and I felt the years disappear again. Aluna poured tea and talked about London, about how busy it had been and how she missed the quiet of Wales. I listened and nodded, though I couldn't stop looking at Peter. He looked older, of course, but there was something gentle in his face that made me remember why I had loved him once. After tea, Aluna said she had to make a phone call, so she left the room. Peter and I sat in silence for a while. The sound of rain on the window filled the space between us. At last he said quietly, "It's strange to be back." I nodded. "It must be," I said. "Does it feel like home?" He smiled a little. "In some ways, yes. In others, not at all." Then he looked at me again. "You haven't changed much, Margaret." I laughed softly. "I have. We all have." He shook his head. "You were always honest," he said. "And kind. I remember that." Before I could reply, Aluna came back into the room, full of energy again. "You two look serious," she said. "I hope you weren't talking about the past. That's dangerous at our age." She laughed, and Peter looked down. I smiled, but my hands were cold. When I got home, Brian was in the garden again. He asked where I had been, and I told him. He nodded without much interest. "It's good you have friends," he said. "I like quiet days." That was Brian. Kind, but quiet. Sometimes too quiet. We lived like two people sharing the same space, but not always the same life. In the following weeks, Aluna became a part of everything again. She came to our cafe meetings, organized small dinners, and joined the local art club. Everyone seemed drawn to her, as if she brought light wherever she went. People forgave her for leaving years ago because she still knew how to make them feel special. I watched her, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with something darker that I didn't want to name. One afternoon, she called me. "Margaret, could you help me with something? I'm hosting a charity evening next week. I need someone calm and sensible to help me organize it. You're the first person I thought of." I almost said no, but I heard myself agree. Maybe I wanted to understand her better, or maybe I wanted to be near Peter again. I wasn't sure. The week before the event, I spent many hours at her house. We made lists, wrote invitations, and arranged flowers. Aluna talked a lot about her life in London, about people I didn't know, and about her books and interviews. Sometimes she spoke about Peter, though not always kindly. "He's lost his fire," she said once. "He was never ambitious enough." That's why we left. But now we're back. Maybe he'll find himself again." I didn't answer. I looked at the window instead and saw Peter outside, walking slowly by the trees. He looked lonely. One evening, when Aluna went to buy more wine, Peter came into the kitchen. "You're helping her with the party," he said. "She's lucky to have you." I smiled. "It's nothing." He hesitated. "I wanted to tell you. I didn't forget you, Margaret." My heart beat faster. "That was a long time ago," I said quietly. He nodded. "I know. But sometimes I still think about those days, about what might have been." We looked at each other, both knowing there was nothing more to say. When Aluna came back, she was laughing, holding 2 bottles of wine. The moment was gone. The charity event was a success. People laughed and drank and clapped for Aluna's poetry reading. She stood on the small stage, beautiful in her red dress, her voice still strong. Peter sat quietly at the back, smiling but distant. I helped serve drinks and tidy the tables, trying not to think about what he had said. After the event, Aluna hugged me. "Thank you, Margaret," she said. "You saved me tonight. I don't know what I'd do without you." Her voice was warm, but her eyes looked tired. "You're welcome," I said. "You did wonderfully." She smiled and turned away to greet more guests. Later that night, as people left, I saw Peter standing outside smoking. I walked past him and he said, "Good night." I wanted to stop, to say something, but I didn't. I went home instead. Brian was asleep when I arrived. I sat in the dark living room and listened to the sound of the clock. For the first time in years, I felt awake. The next day, I avoided the cafe. I didn't want to hear the others talk about Aluna again. I went for a walk along the coast instead. The sea was calm, gray, and endless. I thought about the choices we make and how they never truly disappear. I wondered if Aluna had come back to make peace or to start something new. I also wondered what Peter wanted from me, if anything at all. That evening, Aluna called again. "Peter isn't feeling well," she said. "He's been quiet all day. Could you come tomorrow? He always listens to you." Her voice was softer than usual. I hesitated. "Of course," I said at last. I didn't sleep much that night. When I went to their house the next morning, Peter was sitting by the fire. He smiled when he saw me. "She worries too much," he said. "I'm fine." Aluna laughed nervously and went to make tea. We talked for a while about small things, the weather, the garden, the news. Then Aluna came back with tea and biscuits. She sat down and said suddenly, "Do you ever think we made the wrong choices, Margaret?" The question surprised me. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "but we can't change them now." She looked at me closely. "No," she said slowly, "but we can still live with them, can't we?" Then she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. When I left the house, I felt uneasy. There was something in her tone, something hidden. I walked back home through the quiet streets, thinking about her question. That night, Brian asked what was wrong. I said nothing. I told him I was just tired, but I wasn't tired. I was restless. The past had returned, and it was walking beside me now, every day. I didn't know what would happen next, but I could feel a change coming. Something was moving beneath the calm surface of our small lives, something that would not stay buried for long. It was a quiet Sunday morning when everything began to change. The town was still, and the sky was a pale gray. I was sitting in the kitchen with my tea, thinking about nothing in particular, when the phone rang. It was Gwen. Her voice sounded strange, almost breathless. "Have you heard?" she asked. "Heard what?" I said. "Peter Weaver," she whispered. "He's in the hospital. Something happened last night." I felt cold all over. "What happened?" I asked. "A heart problem, I think," Gwen said. "Aluna called an ambulance during the night. They say he's stable, but she's not letting anyone visit yet." I thanked her and hung up. My hands were shaking. I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the window, watching the clouds move slowly across the hills. I didn't know what I was feeling. Fear, sadness, guilt. Maybe all of them at once. By the afternoon, I decided to walk to the river. I needed air. The wind was strong, and the water looked darker than usual. I walked past Aluna's house and saw her standing at the gate. She looked tired, her face pale. When she saw me, she gave a small nod. I walked over to her. "I'm sorry about Peter," I said quietly. "How is he?" She looked away before answering. "The doctors say he will be fine, but I don't know. He looks so weak." Then she took a deep breath. "Would you like to come in?" Inside the house, everything was quiet. There were flowers on the table and the smell of medicine in the air. Aluna sat down slowly, as if every movement took effort. "He's sleeping now," she said. "They'll keep him in hospital for a few days." She poured herself a small glass of wine, though it was still early in the day. I noticed that her hands were trembling. "You must be tired," I said. "I'll go if you need to rest." She shook her head. "No. Stay. I don't want to be alone." We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then she looked at me. "Do you still think about the past, Margaret?" she asked suddenly. I felt my stomach tighten. "Sometimes," I said. "But not often." She smiled faintly. "I think about it more than I should. I think about things I said, things I did, and people I hurt." Her voice trembled on the last words. I didn't know what to say. I waited. Then she looked straight at me. "You loved him once, didn't you?" I couldn't speak. She already knew the answer. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "A long time ago." Her eyes filled with tears. "I knew," she whispered. "I always knew. That's why I left so quickly. I couldn't bear to see it. You and him. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I took him away because I was afraid of losing him. And maybe I was wrong to do that. Her voice broke, and for the first time, I saw her not as the confident woman everyone admired, but as someone fragile and lost. I wanted to tell her that it didn't matter anymore, that it was all in the past. But the truth was that it did matter. It always had. I looked at her and said quietly, "We were young. We all made mistakes." She smiled sadly. "Yes, but some mistakes stay with us forever." She stood up and walked to the window. The light from the river fell across her face. "When Peter got ill last night, I thought he was going to die. I thought about all the years we wasted fighting and pretending. And I realized I never really understood him. Maybe you did." I didn't know how to answer. I wanted to comfort her, but the words wouldn't come. After a while, she turned back to me. "Will you go and see him?" she asked. "He'd like that." I hesitated, then nodded. "If you're sure." She nodded slowly. "Yes. Go tomorrow. He'll be awake by then." The next day, I went to the hospital. The corridors smelled of disinfectant, and everything felt cold and bright. I found Peter's room. He was sitting up in bed, pale but smiling faintly. When he saw me, his eyes softened. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I hoped you'd come." I sat beside him. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Tired," he said, "but alive. That's something." We both laughed a little, though it wasn't really funny. We talked for a while about simple things. The weather, the town, the people we used to know. Then he said, "Aluna told me she spoke to you." I nodded. "She said she knew about us." He smiled weakly. "She's always known. I tried to forget, but some memories don't go away." He paused for a moment and looked at me seriously. "You were kind to me, Margaret. Kinder than I deserved." I felt my throat tighten. "That was a long time ago," I said softly. "I'm glad you're safe now." He reached out his hand, and I held it for a moment. His skin was cold, but his touch was gentle. "You still care," he said quietly. "Yes," I whispered. "I always did." When I left the hospital, the sky was beginning to clear. The sun was low, shining through thin clouds. I walked home slowly, feeling both heavy and light at the same time. I didn't tell Brian about the visit. He wouldn't understand. He lived in the present, and I lived half in the past now. Over the next few weeks, Peter recovered slowly. I saw him sometimes in the garden when I passed their house. He would wave, and I would wave back. Aluna often looked tired but calmer. She still organized gatherings, but she didn't talk about London anymore. She stayed close to home. It was as if her energy had shifted from showing off to holding on. One evening in late autumn, she invited me for dinner again. It was just the three of us. The air outside was cold, and rain beat softly against the windows. We ate in the small dining room with candles on the table. The light made everything look warm. After dinner, Aluna poured wine for everyone and said, "I want to thank you both for being here, for forgiving me." Peter looked at her kindly. "There's nothing to forgive," he said. She smiled at him, then turned to me. "You were always the better one, Margaret. You stayed kind. I didn't." I shook my head. "We all do what we think we must." For a long time, we sat quietly, listening to the rain. Then Aluna stood and said she was tired. She kissed Peter on the cheek and went upstairs. I helped clear the table. When we finished, Peter walked me to the door. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. "It means more than you know." I looked at him for a moment, trying to find the right words. "Take care of her," I said. "She needs you." He smiled sadly. "She always did, and I wasn't always there." I touched his hand lightly and left. That night, as I walked home through the cold air, I felt peaceful for the first time in years. The past was still there, but it no longer hurt in the same way. It was like an old scar that had finally stopped aching. When I got home, Brian was sitting by the fire, reading. He looked up and smiled. "You're late," he said. "I was with Aluna and Peter," I told him. He nodded. "They seem nice," he said. I smiled. "Yes, they are." A few weeks later, winter came. The hills turned white and the river froze at the edges. Life in the town slowed down. Aluna stopped going out as much. One morning, I saw Peter at the market alone. He told me she wasn't feeling well. "It's nothing serious," he said, but his eyes told me otherwise. I visited a few times, bringing soup and flowers. She always smiled and thanked me, though her voice grew weaker. One day she said, "If I go before him, promise me you'll visit him. He needs company." I promised her. In February, she passed away quietly in her sleep. The funeral was small but full of love. People spoke kindly of her, and Peter stood beside me, his face pale but calm. After it was over, he said, "She was tired. I think she was ready." I nodded. "She made peace," I said. "Maybe that's all any of us can do." Months later, when spring returned, I walked by the river again. The air smelled of flowers, and the hills were green. I thought about all of us, Aluna, Peter, Brian, and myself, and how life had carried us in so many directions only to bring us back together again. I didn't feel regret anymore, only understanding. We had loved, lost, and lived, each in our own way. And perhaps that was enough. Sometimes I still see Peter sitting by the river with his book. We don't talk much. We don't need to. There's a quiet peace between us now, something gentle and real. When I walk home in the evening, I feel lighter. The secrets are no longer heavy. The past has finally found its place in the story of my life. and I have found mine too. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share.